The office across the street is stuck in a time loop. I'm not sure how much longer I have to write this. Karen keeps staring at me, and honestly, she's the office hooker, so there's no telling how long before she runs off to tattle to the boss. I work for a public relations agency in Boston, Massachusetts. Don't bother Googling it, you won't find anything. That's sort of the whole idea of public relations. If we're doing our job right, you'll never know we exist. We handle brand management, media relations, crisis control, and social media campaigns for a whole load of companies, which usually keeps me far too busy to stare out my window in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. But at exactly 2:32 p.m., I glanced up, and there it was, the perfect view into the office across the street. I should probably back up a bit. I was recently promoted to vice president, which came with a nice raise and an even nicer corner office. Our company is on the 13th floor, which means I get an impressive view of the city and a direct line of sight into the building opposite ours. Like most old Boston structures, it's built of brick and steel, with large polished windows wedged between aging masonry. But it wasn't the building that caught my attention, it was the people inside. I was minding my own business on a conference call, sipping a latte, when a sudden flash of color flickered at the edge of my vision. I turned just in time to see a timid, mousy-looking middle-aged woman slap a much taller woman across the face. I froze, mouth hanging open, watching as the taller woman burst into tears, clutching her cheek. A red flower fell from her hair and landed on the floor. "Kate, are you still there?" The phone buzzed in my ear. "Oh, right. Yes, sorry," I stammered. "The analytics report suggests increasing ad spend. We think it would boost consumer engagement." "I'm not sure the client will go for that," my boss clicked her tongue. "We can bring it up on our next call," I murmured, still staring out the window. By then, the mousy woman was berating another coworker, a man in his late 30s with peppered hair and tanned skin. His hand rested on the tall woman's lower back, comforting her. The mousy woman jabbed a finger in his face, wagging it furiously. A wedding ring gleamed on her hand. So, was she married to him? And if so, why was he comforting the tall woman? And if we have it by Friday, we can beat the press release. "Right, Kate, right," I muttered. "I'll handle it." I turned back toward the window, only to find the office completely dark. The three figures had vanished. How did they disappear so fast? "Great, Kate, that's your action item," the phone chirped. I hung up dazed as if waking from a strange dream. I pressed my cool palm to my eyes, blinked, took another sip of coffee. When I looked again, the office across the street was still pitch black, even though sunlight flooded the city. Forcing myself to ignore it, I focused on the press release due Friday. By the end of the day, the odd scene had somehow slipped from my mind. Only one thing lingered. The image of a blooming red flower appearing and fading repeatedly in my dreams, over and over and over. The next morning, armed with a bagel and a double espresso, I walked in ready to face my mountain of tasks. But the moment I sat down, the strangest feeling washed over me, as if someone were watching me. The hairs on my neck stood up. A shiver ran through me. I turned to look across the street. No fight, no shouting, no movement at all, just complete, unwavering darkness. Somehow that was even worse than yesterday's slap. Why was the office still dark? It was 9:00 a.m. People should have been at their desks, but whatever. Not my business if they were a lazy bunch. Hours passed. Midday slump hit. I stretched, swiveled my chair toward the window, and froze. The office was now lit up again, and two people were moving inside. The tall woman, the one who'd been slapped, was sitting on the edge of the man's desk. The man whose wife had slapped her. Her red dress rode up her thigh. He leaned toward her, smiling, twirling a pen between his fingers. I immediately scooted closer to the glass. Whatever was about to happen, I sure as hell wasn't going to miss it. He was gently tracing circles on her thigh, all while pretending to read a sheet of paper he held in front of him. The girl was playing coy as well, leaning forward to point something out on the paper. Her chest bounced dangerously close to his flushed cheek. Even from my office, I could clearly see a framed photo on his desk, a picture of him and his mousy wife on their wedding day. Figures. I guess he'd had enough of pretending to be coy, because he slid his hand up her thigh. Her tight dress rode up, and in one quick motion, he tugged her panties aside. Before I knew it, I was basically watching a live adult film. He took her right there on the desk, paperwork be damned. Their frantic lovemaking sent his briefcase, coffee mug, and stacks of documents tumbling to the floor. Even the photo of his devoted wife was knocked off the desk by the girl's thigh and crashed to the ground. He kept going, pounding into her from behind, as if the chaos around them didn't exist. When they finally finished, they calmly began picking up the scattered papers and office items, placing everything back where it belonged. The photo was the only casualty. The glass had cracked when it hit the floor. The girl was tugging her dress back into place when the mousy woman knocked on the office door. I was stunned. People paid good money to watch drama like this, and here I was getting it for free. My face was practically pressed against the window. From where I sat, I could see both his corner office and the room directly beside it, a simple workspace filled with desks and generic office art. Nothing remarkable. I assumed the whole office must have been occupied at that hour, but I could only clearly see those two rooms, separated by a thin brick wall. The mousy woman knocked again. The man and the girl quickly sat across from each other as if they hadn't just been going at it seconds earlier. He straightened his tie. She combed her hair with her fingers. He must have called out something, because the mousy woman stepped inside. Her bright smile disappeared instantly when she saw he wasn't alone. She paused, stiffened, then turned sharply and slammed the door behind her. The man called after her, sounding pathetic. "Kate, what on earth are you still doing here?" I nearly jumped out of my skin when I realized the question wasn't coming from him, but from my own boss. I whipped around to see Andrea standing in the doorway of my office. She was holding her bag, worry etched across her face. What do you mean?" I stammered. "It's 10:02 p.m., she said, eyebrows raised. Sure enough, it was. The entire office around me was dark, and the city outside had already settled into nighttime quiet. A sharp, pulsing pain radiated behind my eyes, and my mouth felt painfully dry. How long had I been watching that office? "Are you feeling okay?" Andrea asked, her voice softening. "I only came back because I left my phone here." "Oh, yeah, I'm fine," I said. "I guess I lost track of time." The excuse sounded pathetic even to me. "Well, all right," she said uncertainly. "Remember, we have a week off starting next week. Plenty of time to rest while the office gets renovated." "Of course," I mumbled. "Just call if you need anything," she added, turning to leave. My head throbbed so badly I could barely think. I rubbed my eyes and took a final sip of my cold latte. I could have sworn I didn't even look over at the other building until around 2:30. And the scene I watched couldn't have lasted more than 20 minutes. So how the hell did 8 hours disappear? I packed my bag quickly and shut down my computer, keeping my gaze deliberately away from the window. But as I turned off the light, I couldn't help myself. I glanced. I really wish I hadn't. They were all standing there, the mousy woman, the tall girl, and the man, all facing my window, all smiling. Their lips stretched into impossibly wide grins, the corners reaching toward their eyelids as if their faces were splitting apart. Their teeth were jagged and yellow. They waved in perfect unison as the lights in their office switched off one by one, plunging their figures into darkness. Even then, I swear I could still see their eyes, bright, white, unblinking. I barely slept that night. I had feverish, shifting dreams full of warped shapes and blinding lights. Every time I woke, my head felt like it was pounding in sync with my heartbeat. More than once, I jolted up gasping, convinced someone was choking me, only to find my sweat-soaked bedsheets twisted tightly around my neck. I drifted in and out until my alarm exploded at 7:00 a.m., dragging me out of my half-conscious haze. I felt shaky, exhausted, and terrified of going back to work. Part of me wanted to call in sick, claim I had the flu, but I'd accomplished nothing yesterday, and that massive press release still needed to be finished before Friday. So I forced myself to get ready and headed into the office. "Girl, you don't look so good," Gary said the second I walked in. He was the office gossip, and he lived for moments like this. "I'm fine, Gary," I said, brushing him off. "I just didn't sleep well." "Please," he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks." A flare of anger shot through my chest. "What does it matter to you what I look like? I'm not dressing up for your sake," I snapped. Gary's eyes widened, and I realized a few coworkers had poked their heads out of their cubicles. Their faces looked oddly blank, almost blurry. Heat rose to my cheeks under their stares. "I didn't mean to offend you," Gary said quietly, his tone cautious, as if trying not to provoke a wild animal. "You're never like this. Are you okay?" I looked away. "I'm sorry, I'm really tired," I stammered, moving past him. I could feel everyone's eyes burning into my back as I hurried to my office. I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to steady my breath. I was just stressed. That had to be the explanation. The pressure of the new promotion was getting to me. Once this week was over, things would calm down. I took a deep breath and sat at my desk, intentionally avoiding the window. Guilt crept in. I'd been a complete jerk to Gary. He didn't deserve that, especially over something so minor. I opened a new email and started typing an apology. "Hey G, I'm really sorry about earlier. I've just been feeling pretty run down this week. I didn't mean to snap at you." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Gary had been here forever. He was always around, always listening, always collecting every rumor and whisper. If anyone knew anything about the office across the street or someone who worked there, it would be him. I I rewrote the email. Hey Gary, really sorry about earlier. I've been exhausted and distracted this week, and I didn't mean to take it out on you. Honestly, I can't get that office across the street out of my head. Do you remember who used to sit in my office before me? I bet they were just as distracted by the drama happening over there. LOL. Maybe they figured out a way to block the view. Kate. I hit send and took a sip of water. I sounded upbeat and apologetic. Hopefully he'd accept it and move on. But as soon as I stood to head to the bathroom, a reply popped up. No worries at all, I get the workday blues too. But I'm not sure if anyone told you, but Mary used to sit in your office. Maybe ask HR about switching offices. I froze, cold dread spread through me. Mary had sat at my desk. Mary had typed on my keyboard. Mary had stared out of my window into the same building across the street. Mary took her own life 3 years ago. The news had torn through the office back then. I was still new, just starting to climb the ladder, still mixing up people's names. The story was that a VP had gone up to the roof, stripped naked, and hurled herself over the concrete barrier, falling to her death. According to a coworker who'd seen her moments before, she'd said she had to get to them. There was no explanation, just hushed meetings and a sterile HR email reminding us to seek help for stress or depression. People whispered about it for a while, but eventually the gossip died. Life moved on. And now I sat at her desk, with her view. I turned to the window, praying, begging to see only darkness. Instead, I saw them. The man sat at his desk typing, looking almost cheerful. A pristine, uncracked photo of him and his mousy wife stood front and center. I was shocked he'd managed to get it replaced so quickly after the way it was smashed yesterday during his little escapade with the tall girl. On the other side of the wall, his wife stood at her workstation. She looked younger than she had the previous day, happier somehow. Then the tall girl walked into view. She wore a tight white dress that flared at the bottom, paired with black stiletto heels. She carried a box full of papers and office plants. She paused, smiled politely at the mousy woman, and was guided to a clean, untouched desk, as if it were her first day. My heartbeat kicked up. No, that made no sense. She couldn't be new. She'd been sleeping with the boss yesterday. She'd been slapped the day before. She couldn't just suddenly be a new hire. These people knew her. They had to. The boss stepped out of his office and approached her, extending his hand. She shook it shyly, staring down at her heels. Even from my distance, I saw the blush creeping up her neck. My phone rang loudly, cutting through my thoughts. I felt queasy, feverish. Hello, I answered. Kate, Andrea's clipped voice snapped in my ear. You're 10 minutes late to the conference call. We're all waiting on you. A migraine pounded behind my eye. The call had been scheduled for 3:00 p.m., yet somehow it was already 9:30 or maybe even 10:00 a.m. at the latest. I had only just sat down. Then I glanced at the clock on my computer. The black digits were unmistakable. 3:10 p.m. I'm so sorry, Andrea, I murmured quickly. I lost track of the conference number. I'm dialing in now. Okay, please do. I dialed in and pressed the phone to my ear, my eyes flicking back to the window across the street. They were all still there, frozen in time. The boss had his hand outstretched, fingers brushing the flushed tall woman. The mousy woman stood rigidly nearby, her neck stiff, her feet planted. Every few seconds their bodies twitched, glitching like characters in a broken video game stuck in a loop. The nightmares were worse that night. Dresses swirling in circles, red flowers blooming violently and then rotting away into decayed eyeballs, blood misting across lips, fluorescent lights flickering and shattering, spraying glass onto threadbare carpet. I woke in a pool of sweat, feverish and weak, but it was Friday. If I can just get through today, I told myself as I drove to the office, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The office was quiet when I arrived, or rather muffled. It felt like someone had stuffed cotton balls into my ears. Everything was softened, blurred. Indistinguishable faces waved from shadowy cubicles. I went straight to my office, shut the door, and immediately turned my attention to the building across the street. At first, only darkness, deep, unflinching. Then, as if aware I was watching, the lights flicked on. It was obvious a long time had passed. The man sat at his desk, fingers drumming against his keyboard. His wedding ring was gone. His hair was a little grayer. A faint frown creased his face. The photo of him and his wife lay cracked again, pushed into the corner of his desk, forgotten and dusty. He looked tense, glancing repeatedly at the clock above the doorway, biting his lip as if whispering, "Not yet, not yet, not yet." I could practically hear the words. The mousy woman hovered in the adjoining room, idly tapping a pen against her lower lip, leaving dark blue smudges. Her wedding ring was gone as well. She kept checking her watch wrapped around her pudgy wrist, sighing with each peek. Almost, I imagined her saying. Then the tall girl entered, gently placing her bag on her chair. When she removed her jacket, my breath snagged in my throat. She was pregnant, at least 8 months. She rested one hand on her swollen stomach and nodded politely at the mousy woman. The tall girl wore a black dress with a vivid red scarf that matched her lipstick. Mesmerized, I leaned closer to the window. The mousy woman stepped toward her. "It's time, it's time, it's time." She lunged, the tall girl gasped, caught completely off guard. In the mousy woman's hand gleamed a long, sharp knife she must have grabbed from under her keyboard. She drove it into the girl's stomach again and again, each stab landing with a sickening, wet thump. The tall girl shrieked, her hands flying to her abdomen, but there was no use. The mousy woman kept plunging the knife, her hands quickly painted in violent red. The man must have heard the chaos because he rushed in. His eyes darted across the scene. The tall girl had collapsed to the floor, her dress torn and soaked. One hand clutched her swollen stomach, the other reached desperately toward him. The mousy woman only stared, feet planted. "Please help," I could almost hear the girl plead. This time, this time, this time. The man stepped over the pool of blood, reaching toward her. She smiled faintly, stretching her hand toward his, but he didn't take it. He seized her scarf with both hands. He pulled until it cinched tight around her throat. Shock flared in her eyes, then drained into despair. She clawed weakly at the scarf, now her noose, but he only pulled tighter and tighter. And then she went still. Her body slumped onto the office carpet, her head tilting to the side, her glazed eyes locking directly onto mine. The man and the mousy woman stared at her body for several long seconds. Then their gazes lifted to me. Their smiles spread, slow and sinister, across their blood-splattered cheeks. I lunged for the phone, my fingers trembling as I punched in 911. 911, what's your emergency? A smooth voice answered. I want to report a murder, I stammered. At 535 Boone Street, a pregnant woman was just stabbed. I don't think she's alive anymore. Okay, the operator said calmly. Of course she's not alive anymore. No human could survive 37 stab wounds to the abdomen. My blood ran cold. I didn't tell you my name, I stammered stupidly. Oh, poor little Kate, the voice hissed into my ear. You never had to. You always call me on Fridays. I ripped the phone from my ear and hurled it across the desk. It hit the floor with a dull crack, the dial tone ringing and ringing in my head. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst. I turned back toward the office across the street, terror seething through me. The tall girl was perched casually on the man's desk, her red dress riding high along her thigh. He leaned toward her, smiling, twirling a pen between his fingers. No, she was dead. I watched her die. I watched the tall coworker sob openly, one hand pressed to her swollen cheek. The red flower in her hair crumbled, falling to the floor, blooming, then withering. That had happened before, days ago. Behind the wall stood the man's mousy wife. She looked younger than she had the day before, younger and happy. Then the tall girl entered the frame again, wearing a tight white dress that flared at the bottom, teetering on black stiletto heels. She was carrying a box filled with papers and desk plants, all of them smeared with blood. No, that wasn't right. That wasn't how it happened. None of this happened this way. The boss stepped out of his office and approached her, extending a polite hand. She shook it shyly, smiling down at her shoes. Then he placed both hands around her slim neck and squeezed. The mousy woman laughed. The picture frame cracked. You always call on Fridays, I screamed, stumbling to my desk and tearing pages from a notebook. Papers fluttered to the ground behind me. I grabbed a pen, uncapped it with my teeth, spitting the plastic top across the floor. I kicked off my heels and collapsed to my knees. You always call on Fridays. You always call on Fridays. Today was Friday. Today was the day the tall girl died. The man was done with pretending. He slid his hand up the girl's tight dress, pulled her panties off in one swift movement, and wound them around her throat. The mousy woman laughed again. The picture frame wobbled. You always call on Fridays. Tuesday was when I first noticed them, yes, Tuesday. But that wasn't the day they met. No, Tuesday was the day the girl was slapped. Now the mousy woman was comforting another coworker, a man, maybe late 30s, peppered hair, tan skin. His arm rested on the tall woman's lower back, soothing her. The mousy woman took a knife and plunged it into the tall girl's stomach. The blade pushed all the way through to her back. Blood spurted through the man's fingers. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the nightmare across the street. Thursday was when the mousy woman and the man first met the tall girl. She had been wearing her white dress her first day. Then came the seduction. The man rubbed her thigh while pretending to read a sheet of paper in front of him. The girl played coy, leaning forward slightly to point at something on the page, her chest grazing near his cheek. The picture frame fell. The mousy woman sobbed. Yes, the white dress was the first time they met. The seduction came next, the red dress. The third event, the tall girl crying openly, hand pressed to her swollen cheek, the red flower falling again and again, blooming. Yes, the timeline was starting to make sense. But the fourth event, that was the day she died. That was when she was pregnant. These moments must have happened months apart. The mousy woman lunged. The tall girl staggered. The knife in the mousy woman's hand gleamed, pulled from beneath her keyboard. Plop, plop, plop. Oh, poor little Kate, don't you know, you always call on Fridays. I dialed 911 feverishly, my vision flickering in and out of focus. 911, what's your emergency? The smooth voice asked. I want to report a murder. At 535 Boone Street. A pregnant woman was just stabbed. I don't think she's alive anymore. Okay, the operator replied. But how will you know for certain unless you check? You want to, you know you have to. Of course I had to. I always called on Fridays. I stumbled out of my office. The dial tone still rang in my ear. My office was dark, the carpet ripped up, but wasn't the renovation scheduled for next week? How long had I been in there? It didn't matter. I headed to the elevator, down, down, down. Outside, the streetlights glowed like stars. I wanted to climb them up, up, up to the very top, but I couldn't. I had to reach the office across the street. I had to see them. The door to the 13th floor wasn't locked. I stepped across the threshold, half expecting something to happen. Nothing did. The office resembled mine's same torn-up carpet, but one thing was different. A red flower lay on the floor, blooming, withering, blooming again. I stepped toward the light at the far end of the office, the box in my arms growing heavier with every step. Hi, it's so great to meet you. A mousy woman greeted me brightly. My name is Karen. Hi, Karen, I'm Kate, the new receptionist, I said, smiling as I shifted the box. We shook hands a bit awkwardly. Oh, here, darling, you can set that down right here, Karen said, gesturing toward an empty desk. Relieved, I placed the box onto the surface and smoothed the front of my white dress. Just then, a man in his mid-30s walked into the room. Tan skin, peppery hair. My heart climbed straight into my throat. He was far more handsome than I had expected. Now, you must be Kate, he said warmly. It's a pleasure to meet you. Our hands touched and I glanced down shyly at my feet. I could feel the heat blooming in my cheeks. Karen noticed too, her smile tightening slightly. My husband is a wonderful boss, she said through stiff lips. I'm sure you'll be very happy here. He smiled, his fingers giving the slightest twitch against mine. I'm sure I'll never want to leave, I replied.
Thank you for watching. Share your thoughts about this in the comments. See you tomorrow.